Just checking.
Welcome, friends. I have a very exciting special show for you today. I am with John Stuart Reid, an acoustic physics scientist. And let me tell you about him. John is an acoustic physics researcher. He has studied the physics of sound for 4 decades and is a respected authority in the field of cymatics. Cymatics is the study of viable sound and vibration. Cymatics brings the changing nature of sound as well as matter to the life in the forms of images, and thanks to the combination of mathematics and light, bringing out the shapes of sound waves. John is only one of 2 people to have studied the acoustics of the Great Pyramid, and he's experienced a significant healing of his lower back during his acoustic study of the Great Pyramid, which began his research in the field of sound healing. In 1997, he conducted a series of experiments in the pyramid's king's chambers, which led him to invent the Cymascope instrument. The Cymascope is a new type of device that makes sound visible. John is talked about in my book, Superpowers. In fact, he's on the very front cover. He got first look at the book, and it's been a blessing. I'm very honored to have you. And we're going to dive a bit more into his findings and get a bigger picture on his knowledge. I'm super excited. It's not just in the book. It's now here, expanding up to you right now, face to face. And so his Cymascope is a new type of device that we're going to talk about. And so I'm so excited to talk to you more about sound therapy, John. Just because people can't see it, we need to teach them more about it. So welcome. And let's see what I want to ask you this first. I want to hear about your experience on the pyramids. To me, that is phenomenally exciting. Please share with us what happened with you.
I would love to, Noelle. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. There's one little aspect to that introduction that I would like to correct, if I may, which is your use of the term sound waves, because sound waves don't actually exist. You know, I'm presuming here that you wrote that part of the introduction, and it's a common enough, term, of course, used in our world, isn't it? Sound waves, you learn about them in school, you learn about them in college and university, and even, most scientists of today, of course, are referring to sound waves. However, it is a misnomer, a misnaming, and sound waves in nature don't actually exist. What does exist are sound bubbles. So, as I'm speaking now, there's a beautiful sound bubble emerging from my mouth and indeed, from my nose as well, providing I don't have a cold, and I don't right now. And that bubble, of course, is expanding at the speed of sound. Now, as the bubble expands, so it oscillates in and out, it pulsates in and out with all the vibrational periodicities of in this case, my vocal folds. And that's that oscillation, that pulsation of the sound bubble as it's expanding. If you graph that on something, say, like an oscilloscope device, which actually there's one right behind me here, yes, it will look like a wave, but that's a graph. That is a graph, right? It's not the space form of the sound itself that's propagating as a beautiful bubble. So it is a misnaming, and of course, nature does not use graphs, right? Nature is an analog medium. So anyway, I just wanted to put that straight, because I know so many people will just think that, of course, sound is a wave. And if you would ask anyone, Noelle, about sound waves, say you would ask someone, what is the shape of sound? They would say, oh, that's a wave, isn't it? And then if you say to them, well, show me that wave coming out of your mouth now, they would go like this. They would do this wiggle in the air, right? Yes. But you see how mistaken you can be? That is not the shape of sound. It is a beautiful bubble. So there you go. Anyway, we're now going to talk about the pyramids, right?
Yes, yes. I love that answer. Thank you for expanding on that because you've just clarified something that everybody's gotten wrong for a really long time. So,
Indeed, right, yeah. It's just a misnaming, basically. I mean, physicists, of course, know that the shape of sound is actually spheroidal or, spherical, roughly spherical. But still, they talk about sound waves. Anyway, in 1996, this is a very short version of this story because I know we've got a lot of ground to cover today. But in 1996, very early in that year, my daddy and I found ourselves in the Great Pyramid, in the King's Chamber, all alone. It was just one of those happy accidents, we didn't plan it. And I'd always wanted to lie in the sarcophagus, which is this block of granite that's been hollowed out, 3.7 tons of rose granite, kind of a pinky color granite. And I lay in the sarcophagus this day while my daddy stood there and watched, and listened, because I made a vocal glissando. And at one particular vocal pitch, it felt like every cell in my body was tingling and goosebumps actually broke out all over my flesh. And it also felt like there was a wave of energy rushing up and down my spine. It really got my attention. I thought, oh my goodness, this is really quite significant. And really, it inspired me actually to go back to the pyramid armed with acoustics instrumentation, which I did. I gained permission. And later that same year, in 96, I carried out a series of very standard acoustics experiments, any acoustics engineer would be very familiar with. There were some really interesting results, but I don't want to labor this aspect of the story because the far more exciting aspect of the story is in 97, because I went back again in 97, I gained permission again. And it was in these 97 experiments that two amazing events occurred. First, let me say that 3 weeks before going out to Egypt in 97, I quite badly injured my lower back. And at the time, I thought I was going to have to cancel this whole mission, but I had paid a lot of money, they don't allow you to do these kind of things for free. And I just basically gritted my teeth and, took probably more painkillers than I should have done. But anyway, the upshot is that I did manage to get myself into the pyramid. Other people carried in the equipment. I couldn't carry anything more than my camera, basically. But what it turned out, initially I thought this was, something really bad that had happened in my life. But it turned out to be a gift, a great gift, actually, not only for me, but for humanity, as I will soon explain. So in great pain, I set up this experiment, which was a cymatics experiment, cymatics, so cymatics is the study of visible sound. And whereas in 96, I had carried out these standard acoustics experiments with the sarcophagus, but particularly, and with the chamber as a whole, I was now interested to see the resonances in that sarcophagus. And in order to do that, the basic principle of cymatics is whenever you have sound and you have a membrane, there will be a pattern of acoustic energy that imprints onto that membrane. Of course, it's invisible normally to the unaided eye, but nevertheless, all around you, whenever there's sound, there's always cymatic patterns all around you every day, but you just can't see them, right? So in my case here, what I did was I stretched a membrane across the sarcophagus, and instead of me lying in the sarcophagus, now I put a small speaker there so that I could excite the sarcophagus with sound without me having to lie in it, right? And then, of course, I sprinkled sand on the surface of the membrane. Why? Because that is the revealing medium. That's what you can't see the pattern until you sprinkle on some powder or some medium. In this case, with literally sand that I had collected from outside the pyramid. So, you can liken this really to something like a fingerprint or a thumbprint, on glass, right? You can't see it. It's virtually invisible until you sprinkle on a revealing medium. In that case, it would be, the forensic scientists use something like talcum powder, right? Then you see the fingerprint. Very similar kind of principle, except in here we are talking about vibration that literally excites a membrane on which you sprinkle a revealing medium, in this case sand, and lo and behold, you will begin to see, in this case, the resonances, natural resonances in the sarcophagus, right? Well, what of course I couldn't have predicted, no way to know, the patterns that I was going to be seeing were not geometric patterns, which is very, very typical of sound or cymatic patterns. Normally, you see quite beautiful geometry. If you were using beautiful sounds, it would create usually geometry that is very recognizable in terms of, the structure, the symmetry, and so on. And what I thought was, okay, I will be seeing this beautiful geometry. I will take the photographs of this back to my lab in England, where I will be able to analyze them and give me some clues as to what's going on in this sarcophagus. How did I feel what I felt that day? The goosebumps and the tingling of my cells. And I just wanted to gain some insights. Anyway, what I couldn't have predicted, of course, was what actually happened, which was a series of ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs began to emerge in the sand on the sarcophagus. And at this point, using very low frequency tones, by the way, to begin with, very low frequency, around 50 hertz. At this point, the antiquities inspector, who had been standing up against the north wall, filing his nails and looking across at me with a very bored expression, you probably thought I was a little bit nuts. But, I had paid a lot of money for this, and he was probably thinking he's not doing any damage, so just let him do what he's doing, right? That was the kind of look that came across on his face. But now, seeing an ancient Egyptian hieroglyph appear in the sand, of course, he ran across and he was really excited at what he was seeing, as I was, of course. How you do that? How you do that? You see, this is what he said. And so now he became very animated and engaged. He wanted to help. How can I help you? What can I do? You see? And then a whole series of these ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs emerged in the sand. Not every frequency created a hieroglyph. In between hieroglyphs, there were some really strange sort of like coral sea type images, the only way I can describe it. Anyway, but what then happened, which was, in a way, in one sense, even more miraculous, was that there was suddenly, I noticed, no pain in my lower back. That pain that I'd had for 3 weeks and had been all consuming, I was, in so much pain, it was really excruciating, just vanished, basically like a miracle. It seemed at the time like a miracle. And so in the moment when I realized that there was no pain in my lower back, I couldn't really focus. I had to carry on with the experiments, of course. And I just thought, I know what this is. I am excited. Who wouldn't be, seeing these hieroglyphs? And I just thought, I'm sure that this is endorphins flowing in my bloodstream. These are natural opioids created in the brain and in the body when we are having a peak experience. And this was indeed a peak experience. And I just thought, when I get back outside the pyramid, back to the hotel, this pain is going to come back with a vengeance. But actually, the pain never did come back. So I knew that something really important had happened. And that, Noelle, those two events, one, visualizing these beautiful hieroglyphs appearing in the sand. And then secondly, which, by the way, said to me, this could be a new tool for science. And then secondly, the seemingly miraculous healing of my lower back told me that this could be a new tool for medical science, a new way to prevent pain or to mediate pain. And so that's the journey that I've been on ever since. And it's, now 26 years, whatever. And here we are. And so it's been a wonderful journey. We have the Cymascope instrument right behind me. I think you may be able to see it. Anyway, it's here right behind me. And it's now in use in universities all over the world. It's a way to make sound visible. And of course, sound is actually underpins almost every aspect of our world. So that's why the instrument is so important.
Wow. I have some questions about that now. So did you
Sure.
know what the holographics meant when you saw them come up? Do you know what the symbolism meant when they were being shown to you? Or did you get a feeling? Did you get the message?
Sure, I recognize them immediately, Noelle, because, like the very first one was the Jed pillar, which is the backbone of the god Osiris. And that's, a very, very common ancient Egyptian hieroglyph. And then one of the others was the Sa loop, which is like a loop of rope. And that is the symbol for protection. And then there was the Ra, the sun god hieroglyph, which is like a circle inside a circle, concentric circles. Ra, the sun god. So yes, I mean, I recognized them immediately. So of course did the antiquities inspector. There was the sacred eye of Horus, and many others that were all very clearly recognizable. And I do have a hypothesis as to how this kind of magic happened, but it's a really long story, and I think we'd better go go there now.
So when the frequency was hit, is that when it shifted a different frequency and then it changed? Is that how it
that's right. Yeah, different frequencies. So all I was doing basically, so everyone that if you're interested in learning more about cymatics, I'm your guy, I'm your man, because I've been studying cymatics ever since that first experiment in 97, creating the instrument, of course. It's a lot of fun, but also, of course, it is providing so many discoveries in relation to science. So I'm, a very happy boy, I'm working in it's fabulous. But anyone who's interested in this, please do check out our website, soundmadevisible.com, and also the main website, cymascope.com. Again, remembering that it's a CYMA, not S, CYMA. Anyway, check out those, because there's a wealth of information on those sites that you will find. And coming back to the basic principle of cymatics, that when you have a sound and you have a membrane, there must be a cymatic pattern that you can't see, of course, normally. But in this case, going back to the King's Chamber sarcophagus and this membrane, what I was doing was changing the frequency very, very slowly, and then watching for the sand grains, which, don't forget, had just been sprinkled from a cappuccino chocolate shaker, actually, onto the surface of this membrane. So I'm watching the sand grains, right? And then I'm changing the frequency at a particular volume level, particular amplitude level, watching them for movement. Now, as soon as you see movement, any kind of movement, like just a few little grains dancing around a little bit, that's the time to increase the amplitude and to just tweak the frequency a little bit up or down until you maximize the height that these little sand grains are jumping. And that's when just a little bit more amplitude, and suddenly you will see this, whatever the pattern is, emerge on the membrane. In this case, literally ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs emerging. So it's a very fun thing to do. And there are obviously, techniques to learn how to work with cymatics. And I'd be, very happy to help anyone into this field, because it is a fabulous new field of science, actually.
Yes, I believe it's a new earth profession of the future. So exciting that you're here and bringing it to us. And, when you said all that, it made me think that it was kind of like the fountain of youth, a cellular regeneration. What have you found happening with our cells and the sounds combining together? Are you noticing?
The fountain of youth, Noelle. Well, I would love to be in that line, for the Fountain of Youth, because I've got so much work that I want to do. I will, share a couple of aspects in relation to your question here about the Fountain of Youth. One of them is actually very, very important, and it isn't only about youthfulness, it's also about inflammation in the body. Now, inflammation in the body, of course, is a very important aspect of our body's healing mechanism. So, don't think that inflammation is a bad thing. It's not, providing it is acute inflammation, which is an extremely important part of the healing process, natural process. However, of course, chronic inflammation is an entirely different scenario, and it really not anticipated by nature. So when a person has chronic inflammation, and of course it can be triggered by many different life events, it causes usually chronic pain. And one of the aspects of this, which is very important to share with you all, is that there is no pharmacological pill, there's no substance that you can imbibe that will fix a situation where your body has chronic pain or chronic inflammation. Well, the two things are, of course, linked together. However, researchers have discovered in recent times, and there are many really wonderful scientific papers on this subject that I'm about to share with you, that have discovered that by stimulating the vagus nerve of the body, that chronic inflammation can be quite easily reversed, right? This is really good news, but also relating to this, and this is coming back to your Fountain of Youth, Noelle, that stimulation of the vagus nerve has also been shown to slow the rate at which we age. It has also been shown to boost sexual function, and has many other wonderful attributes. So, it's a wonderful series of discoveries that have been made in relation to the vagus nerve. And let me just describe a little bit now about, how this works and how we can all apply vagal stimulation to our bodies very easily and beautifully, actually. So essentially, the vagus nerve is the longest cranial nerve. It's the longest nerve in the body. When it leaves the brain stem, it first branches off left and right to both ears. It goes to the tragus of the ears. This is this little flap of tissue that overhangs our auditory canal. And it doesn't just go to the tragus, actually it goes to various other parts of the ear, which is why our ears are so, really tremendously sensitive to touch. And of course, it's one of the reasons why ears are sometimes thought of as an erogenous zone, for the same reason. So this is the vagus nerve going straight to the ears, mainly to the tragus. And then from there, it immediately goes to the pharynx and the larynx. And then in a dual mode, it goes through the body to all of the major organs in the body. So it's innervating all of the organs. What does that mean? It means that signals are going from the brain to all of your organs, and in reverse. Organs are sending signals back to the brain via the vagus nerve, okay? Now, here's the good news, which is that stimulation of the vagus nerve, of course, is really easy because of where it goes to. It goes to the tragus of the ears. So, for example, if we make our own vocal sounds, even speaking actually has been shown to stimulate the vagus nerve. And I know that some people like to talk a lot. So that's a good thing, social interaction, speaking, a lot actually does help to stimulate the vagus nerve. But much better than that is singing or humming even has a really wonderful stimulation on the vagus nerve, not only because the vagus nerve is connected directly to the larynx, so therefore, obviously, as you're making the sound vibrations, it's literally going into the vagus nerve. But then, of course, your vocal sound is going out into the world as a sound bubble, which then reflects off the wall. Say, if you're in a space, I'm in the lab here now, sounds coming back to me. I can hear my own voice, of course. And it's the same for anyone that's singing or humming. Their voice is being reflected back to them from the walls of their room, their chamber, and therefore stimulating the tragus of the ears. So it's a secondary way that when we make our own sounds, we are stimulating the vagus nerve. But then let's think about music. When we, experience music, ideally through headphones that are of very high quality, then imagine all of the beautiful stimulation of these particularly the very low frequencies in music, which have been found to be optimal for vagus nerve stimulation. So, this is a real win-win, isn't it? Simply by experience, by listening to beautiful music, the music that we love the most is going to actually reverse any chronic inflammation that we have in our bodies. I'll come back to that in a moment. Stimulate, slow the rate at which we age, boost our sexual function, all of these things simply because we are stimulating our vagus nerve. Now, coming back to the chronic inflammation, why that works when no pill that you can take will do the same thing is because it balances what are termed cytokines in the bloodstream. And in someone who has chronic inflammation, they are living with a battle that's going on in their bloodstream between two different types of cytokines, are literally fighting each other. And this is what causes ultimately the chronic inflammation. So by stimulating the vagus nerve by beautiful music or by your own singing or humming, then gradually over a period of weeks, according to the research, the cytokines come gradually back into balance, and inflammation, the chronic inflammation, is gone from your body. So how wonderful is that?
That's amazing. And I love what you said, because I sleep with a speaker by my bed a lot of times with different frequencies playing when I go into theta, delta, and all the different, magic. And I wonder if someday we're going to have beds with speakers in our headboards to basically wash over our bodies as we sleep so we can heal and amplify the regeneration.
What a great idea, Noelle. And it reminds me very much of the 1970s Star Trek, bed of the future, where, Dr. Bones is bending over his patient and he's seeing all these little bar graphs dancing up and down. That bed was not only a diagnostic bed, but also a therapeutic bed. Mm-hmm. And one of the discoveries that I have made in relation to health and well-being is the fact that very low frequencies, such as we're talking about there for the vagus nerve, really low frequencies like below 50 hertz, way down even to as low as 5 hertz. These are subaudible when you get down below 16 hertz. Of course, you can't hear them, but your body can feel them nevertheless. But the discovery that I made, not just myself, but also in collaboration with Professor G of Rutgers University, who is a really wonderful biologist, came here to the lab, and we worked together for several days on a series of experiments involving music and blood. And this came from a hunch that I'd had that maybe music can actually have a beneficial effect on blood, on the cellular, on the longevity actually of red blood cells. And this could easily be tested, and it was actually the inspiration for this came from Pythagoras, about 500 BCE, 2,500 years ago, who said, or is reported to have said, that music could be used in place of medicine. And I recognized that very little research had actually been conducted to test that hypothesis or that, theory that he had or belief. Anyway, so this was the inspiration. And it's a very simple series of experiments concerning whole human blood and exposing whole human blood to music and measuring the number of viable red blood cells in the blood, both before and after immersion in music for 20 minutes. That was the essence of the experiment. And my golly, what we found was amazing. So we were finding that every genre of music that we tested, classical music, popular music, music in 440 tuning, music in 432 tuning, music in 444 tuning, all these different parameters we tested. And in every single case, we found far more viable red blood cells in the blood than in the control test tube. And it turns out that the reason for this, I'm cutting this very short, by the way, because I know we don't have a lot of time, but the reason for this is oxygen. So what happens is the low frequencies in the music cause more oxygen that's already dissolved in the blood, right? There's lots of oxygen in the blood, even when we get it from the blood bank, which is how we receive it. The blood is engorged with oxygen. There's so much oxygen in the blood, but it's not binding to the hemoglobin molecules in the red blood cells. Why? Because there's no pressure. You need pressure to cause that binding. Now, in your bloodstream, in your body, that pressure comes from low frequency pulses of sound as a consequence of your heart. So your heart is obviously a pump. It's pumping, it's circulating the blood around the body. But the other thing it's doing is it's providing low frequency pulses of sound that then cause this oxygen binding process. And this is exactly what was happening in the test tubes that we were using. The sound, the low frequencies in the music were causing the oxygen to be bound to the hemoglobin. That then allowed the proteins in the outer membranes of the old red blood cells, not the, in a test tube of blood, you will always find millions and millions of healthy, viable red blood cells. You'll also find millions that are in a kind of transitory stage where they're not dead, but neither are they very healthy. They're classed actually simply as medically old, right? And the outer membrane is starting to lose its integrity. It's starting to break up. And in the body, it will ultimately die and be mopped up by the body's systems. In the same test tube, there will also, by the way, be millions of red blood cells that are already dead. So we use an automatic cell counter that is able to detect the old red blood cells and the dead versus the healthy live ones. And this is this very simple experiment that shows that music, I'm missing parts of this out, by the way, just for speed, but essentially that music can enable this oxygen binding process. And so coming back to your beds of the future, Noelle, this is where I'm coming from. You can now imagine that if the bed of the future had low frequency transducers built into it, and indeed, beautiful music for us to hear as well, then all sorts of wonderful medical benefits could be gained without pharmacology. No drugs needed. What we're doing is we're giving the body additional oxygen simply by having a beautiful wave-like action of low frequency sound coming up through the bed mattress, basically giving you a beautiful massage, but also giving you more available oxygen in your body to then power the healing, the innate natural healing mechanisms in your body. And at the same time, of course, being able to listen to your favorite music will also have all of these beautiful benefits that I've already mentioned about the vagus nerve.
And this is probably why the Egyptians looked so beautiful and young and vibrant. They were using, I believe, these sources. And now you've rediscovered them and bringing them back up to us to have now.
I don't know that the Egyptians were always youthful. One of the things I can tell you for sure is that their use of the sistrum instrument, actually I have one here, one moment.
Okay. Isn't he so informative? I love this. Oh, yeah.
The sistrum instrument you'll see shown in many ancient Egyptian reliefs, on the walls of tombs and temples. You often see the ladies particularly using this musical instrument. And I came across a quote not all that long ago, actually, related to the festival of Opet in ancient Egypt. And it was the quote, I don't know the exact for word, but essentially what it was saying is that when the sistrum is held up to the nostrils, there is a healing benefit, right? That was the essence of the quotation from the festival of Opet, a health-giving benefit. And now we know from, from fairly recent science that they're actually correct. That what happens is nitric oxide, which is a very important molecule in the body, is produced when the paranasal sinus cavities are optimally stimulated. And the optimal stimulation frequencies are ballpark about 2 kilohertz, 2000 hertz for a woman typically, and about 1000 hertz for a man. And this is the reason for this difference is because of what is termed Helmholtz resonance. So the paranasal sinus cavities have a certain volume, obviously, of air in this case. And Helmholtz resonance talks about any enclosed volume of gas will always have a predominant resonant frequency. It's like you enclose any volume, it will always have a resonant frequency, one particular that is dominant. And so the dominant frequency for males is a little bit lower, of course, than it is for females. Why? Because men have bigger heads generally, right? We're not get into that area. But anyway, the sinus cavities are larger, obviously. Therefore, the frequency of resonance is lower. And the opposite is true for females. So, but the great news here is that the system produces these same kind of frequencies in copious amounts. So literally, when you rattle that instrument near to your nostrils, you will be receiving you'll be generating lots of nitric oxide. And nitric oxide has fabulous healing qualities in the body, one of which, perhaps the most important, is vasodilation. In other words, it's dilating all of our blood vessels. In fact, it's the key ingredient in Viagra. So that'll tell you a lot, right? Just there. So this all happens because you're exciting your paranasal sinus cavities. And the ancient Egyptians clearly knew about this. How they knew about it is a mystery, but clearly they did know about it, Noelle.
Very well. That's amazing. And I talk about extrasensory perception, ESP, in my book. And when you bring these topics up, it's literally expanding on our senses and showing us and explaining us how they are able to do these things and how to understand them better. So thank you so much for helping more people see the invisible and understand. I loved hearing about the ears and the back. I'm very sensitive. So is my children, very sensitive to sound. And I had this dream where I was told there was something that we as humans have called dial perception, where we can hear for miles and miles, like an animal, actually. But we're so tuned into what's right in front of us that if we close our eyes, that's the meditation, is you're going out and up and around the field. So you're turning it on even higher sensory overload here when you're tapping into those extra nerves, it sounds like.
Indeed.
Mm-hmm. I love what you're saying. Thank you for sharing so much beautiful information so far. It's been wonderful to hear this. I'm just sitting back here smiling the whole time, even as I'm off camera. I'm like, I love what he's saying. So
one of the other aspects to the magic of music in relation to healing comes back to a discovery that was made in 2005 by the Niels Bohr Institute in Copenhagen, Denmark. And this is an amazing discovery. And I know that, all of your viewers that, watching this are going to be, you'll never forget this. Once you've know this information, it will stay with you for the rest of your life. I'm absolutely certain of that. So if you had asked me, the question, how can we optimally stimulate our vagus nerve and our body in general before 2005, I would have shared with you pretty much what I just already have shared about how the vagus nerve is stimulated, through our ears, through our vocal apparatus, and so on, right? It's an ideal pathway to bring sound into the body and to stimulate the vagus nerve. However, after 2005, if you'd asked me the same question, I would have given you a different answer, or an additional answer, let's say, in addition to the vagus nerve stimulation. So here's the discovery. I think that most of you watching this will probably think that the nerves of the body, that their primary role is to conduct electricity. The primary role of nerves, according to this discovery, and it has been verified now by many other labs around the world, the primary role of the nervous system of your body is to conduct sound, right? And where the electricity comes into the equation is because there's a myelin sheath around your nerves that has kind of a liquid crystal properties, like a piezoelectric properties, if you know what that is. It means that, normally with a crystal, when you distort a crystal, it will produce electricity. And this is exactly what happens in your nerves, where they have liquid crystal properties. And so the sounds that are the pathways of your nerves are literally conducting sound. The sounds are what creates the electrical impulses through this liquid crystal piezoelectric effect. So, of course, your brain needs the electrical impulses to interpret the world. All of your senses are essentially working because of the electrical impulses. But nevertheless, it's the sound that creates the impulses in the first place. You might think this is very strange, but it's absolutely true. And one of the events in your life that I think, well, we've all probably experienced at some point, is just like you stub your toe on something, right? You're walking around barefoot and you accidentally, strike your toe on something, and it really does hurt a lot, doesn't it? Well, scientists have measured how long it takes for that pain signal to reach your brain. And it's actually a few milliseconds. These are thousandths of a second, right? So it's quite a slow process. And it was this fact that stubbing your toe, or whatever you do to your body, it takes quite a long time for that pain signal to actually arrive at your brain and be interpreted. Oh, I've just, hurt my toe. So that was kind of a clue as to why researchers have gone in this particular direction. Why is it that if electricity is the means by which nerves are conducting signals, electricity travels at virtually the speed of light. So it should only take a few nanoseconds. These are, a millionth, 10 to the minus 9 seconds to reach your brain, as opposed to a few thousandths of a second for the speed of sound. And there is the answer, right? Because your nerves primarily conduct sound, and the electricity is created as a byproduct of the sound. Now, why is this important? Well, because coming back to this question, how can we absorb more signal into our bodies? By immersing ourselves in beautiful soundscapes, in beautiful music, the music of nature, or music from musical instruments. And now let's think about the surface of your body is covered in thousands upon thousands of what they call nociceptors. These are the free nerve endings. So all of the nerves in your body that are ending on the surface of your skin is why you can, prick your finger here and then just move the pin just a couple of millimeters, tiny amount, and prick your finger, and you will know the difference between these two positions. This is because your fingertips, for example, have hundreds and hundreds of these nociceptors in them, but even other parts of your body have thousands of nociceptors distributed everywhere. And now when you realize that these nociceptors are directly connected to all of the nerves in your body, and that when you're immersed in a beautiful soundscape, just think of them now sucking up all that harmonic beauty and sending it inside your body, where it does many magical things. One of which is tipping the scales between noise and signal. If you think of inside your body is actually a very noisy place because of all the trillions and trillions of biochemical reactions that are going on all the time in your body. And it's probably just as well that we can't hear them, because it would drive us nuts if we could. But this is one of the big mysteries in biology. How is it that our cells, all the trillions of cells, can actually receive signals from the brain, from the central processor, um, even in the presence of all of this noise? So we don't have an answer for that, excepting if I were to say to you, uh, how about, have you ever experienced a situation where you're in a cocktail party, say, and it's a noisy room, there's probably a sound system blasting music out too loud, you're trying to shout to be overheard, with your friend that you're chatting to, but at the same time, you're cocking an ear to someone over the other side of the room, someone that you know, right? But they're quite a long way from where you're standing, and yet you can still tune in to their conversation. How does that happen? Well, it happens obviously because of the level of sentience that we have. This consciousness allows us to be able to tune in to that person over the other side of the room, even in the presence of all of this noise, right? And maybe it's similar for the cells in our body that are indeed sentient, and they can tune in to the central processor, the signals from your brain. But one of the aspects that can really help this tipping point of signal versus noise in your body is sucking up beautiful music, which is pure signal for the cells. The cells love that music. Why? Because of the discovery that was made by Dr. James Jimzewski at UCLA in 2002. And what he discovered was that every cell in your body sings, it has a song. And this is true because of the membrane that surrounds the cell, literally breathes in and out. And as it vibrates, it literally creates many frequencies of sound. And again, it's probably just as well that you can't hear those sounds, but actually they are in the audio, in the normal hearing of your ear brain system. In other words, if they were amplified, you would be able to hear them. But anyway, it's the fact that your cells are creating a song, and they do need those same kind of frequencies to give them nutrition. It's a kind of sonic nutrition. That's one of the many reasons why, when you're immersed in beautiful music, your cells are thanking you very much for the experience, because they're literally absorbing the frequencies that they need as a form of nutrition. And one of the things that can happen in a body when it's challenged in some way by, say, an invasion of a pathogen, or you've imbibed some toxic substance, or you have, I don't know, just experienced some physical trauma, a system of your body, your cells, can literally go to sleep. It's called the G0 phase of the cell cycle. Now, when a system of your beautifully balanced body is asleep, there's obviously now an imbalance in your body. And so you feel ill, you feel rotten, and so in order to awaken the cells, to give them the kiss of the sleeping beauty, right? This is one of the ways that you can do it. is by immersing yourself in a beautiful soundscape so that the cells that are asleep can absorb sufficient energy for them to reawaken, rejoin the cell cycle, and then create balance again in your body.
Okay, I love exactly what you said. I agree 100%. When I go into my writing mode, I turn on music. I usually turn on music that I've never heard before. And my reason being because I want to take my mind and brain to the highest frequencies and imaginations. There's no history attached to the music. If I don't know it, I can create anything, right? It's making me unlimited. So when I write, that's what I do. I feel like I go into high realms. I can see light codes. I can see notes of the music. I can see symbolism. And then that's where I'm downloading. I'm getting the chills as I'm saying this. I download the information that needs to come out through the keyboard onto the computer. And then it's just magic. So I understand exactly what you're saying. And whenever I do need to pick me up, I'll crank up some music and I will dance for sure. So I'm going to keep your 20-minute mark in my head, you know, especially when you're having a long day. I have a desk that I can stand up to or sit down. So when I stand up, that's more of my creativity mode. And that's when I'll put music on that makes me excited and amped. And I'll dance as I'm creating sometimes. It's a different energy flow in the body when you're standing. So I absolutely understand what you're saying. And I think it's phenomenal because our bodies are like an antenna. And we're able, once we open the channels, we can receive the information through it. So yes. Beautifully said. Love it. Love it. And then I wanted to ask you about sacred geometry. I have it on the cover of my book, and I know your Cymascope is used, and it shows sacred geometry. So tell us about your sacred geometry findings and your Cymascope. I'm curious about that.
Well, you know, this is coming to the Cymascope instrument itself. As you know, we've talked about the sand on the membrane in the Egyptian sarcophagus. You know, that method of making sound visible is fairly crude. You know, it's two-dimensional. There's not a lot of detail that you can achieve because, of course, it all comes down to the particle size. You know, in this case, sand was what we used there. But in the early days of working to create a Cymascope instrument, I did indeed use that method. You know, I used membranes and usually latex initially. And of course, the tension on the membrane is very important. And there are other parameters to consider. But it very quickly became obvious to me, well, I say quickly, it was 2 years of work actually before I realized that this method was not going to cut it really. We needed more detail. And so I began working with liquids, and one of my scientific heroes, Michael Faraday, who's also, you know, one of my passed over mentors, and you can see him actually right behind me, probably. Yeah, you can see him. There's Michael. He's looking over my shoulder, making sure that I'm doing the right things, you know, with my experiments. Anyway, I love his work, and he worked with what he called crispations, with essentially vibrating fluids. And so I thought, well, you know, I'm going to start working with fluids like Michael did and see whether it produces any better result than the simple, you know, particulate matter on a membrane, on a, you know, PVC or whatever, or latex. And so I began working with all sorts of different fluids. I followed his lead initially. He had been working mainly with egg white. And so I did follow that. And I also tried various whiskeys, alcohols. You know, one of the benefits of that, Noelle, is that you can have a little tipple, you know, after your experiment. But actually, it turned out, you know, cutting a long story short here, that pure water is actually the very, very best for imaging sound. Now, I need you to realize that when sound imprints, the vibrations of sound imprint onto the surface of water, a little bit like I was saying earlier about a fingerprint, you know, on glass, and you sprinkle with talcum powder and suddenly it becomes visible. Well, it's a similar kind of thing. When you vibrate imprint water with sonic vibrations, you're literally creating little wavelets on the surface of the water, and these wavelets are effectively an analog or a model of that sound made visible. Now, one of the important aspects to the Cymascope instrument that I'm sure that some of your viewers are, that are scientifically inclined will realize is that any object in the universe has a natural set of resonant frequencies. And in the case of the Cymascope, it's no different. All objects have their own natural resonant frequencies. So, but we're not interested in scientific terms in those frequencies. What we want to do actually is to tune them out. Why? Because if the Cymascope instrument had these resonant frequencies, it would color effectively the results. In other words, would influence the results. And so the pattern that would occur on the surface of the water would have some reference to the resonant properties of the Cymascope itself. We're not interested in those, of course. We want to create an accurate model of the sound in a geometric form. So what we do is we first analyze the resonances in the sarcophagus, and then having analyzed them, in other words, having identified them, we then tune them out electronically so that there's a flat response now. Any frequency that you put in is then, we then gain an accurate analog, an accurate geometric model of that sound. In other words, it's the sound made visible. I also need you to realize that these cymatic patterns, we call them cymaglyphs, actually, a little bit like hieroglyphs, cymaglyph. These sound patterns are not just on the surface of the water. The sound, when it enters into the water, actually organizes all of the water molecules, not just the surface, but right throughout the depths of the water. And this is an important point about cymatics technology, to realize that when we humans are immersed, or animals for that matter, in a beautiful soundscape, in some beautiful music, say, then all of the visceral waters in our bodies are also being organized. So right away through all of our body, there is organization happening almost instantaneously. When we put sound into the Cymascope instrument, it takes just a few fractions of a second for the pattern to emerge, for all of this beautiful organization, just the blink of an eye, basically, virtually, and all of that beautiful organization occurs. And also, I'd like, another takeaway from this, little conversation, I'd like everyone to remember is that when you're immersed in a beautiful soundscape, then all of the cells in your body that have a membrane, and that's virtually all of the cells, trillions and trillions of them, they have membranes. Those membranes will be receiving a beautiful pattern, a beautiful geometric pattern, a cymatic pattern, when you're immersed in this beauty. So because of what I said earlier about whenever you have sound and you have a membrane, there has to be a cymatic pattern. And cymatics, the principles of cymatics actually work regardless of scale. So here I'm talking about beautiful cymatic patterns imprinted on every cellular membrane in your body. But equally, at the other end of the scale, if we talk about, the planet Saturn, for example, in the solar system, it has a giant hexagon, a cymatic pattern on its north pole, so large it could swallow 3 Earths. That's how big it is, right? So cymatics works regardless of scale. And coming back to your body and these beautiful patterns that are emerging manifesting on the membranes, what happens is, because music is constantly changing its phase, the pattern will not stay stationary. This cymatic pattern that I'm referring to will gently rotate And why that's important is because the cells have little antennae projecting from their membranes. These are called integral membrane proteins, and it's the way that the cell takes in its information from the central processor. It's the way that it takes in nutrients and excretes waste products. It's also the way that the cells in a community in your body literally converse with other cells in the vicinity. And these little IMPs get a beautiful massage. Now you can realize why I'm sharing this, because when you're immersed in music that's always changing its phase, then the cymatic patterns are rotating, they're gyrating about the cellular membranes, giving the IMPs a beautiful massage. In other words, again, sonic nourishment for your cells. So how wonderful is that? Did that answer your question? I'm not sure.
That did, and it made me think of water beds. Those are back in 80s, 70s, 80s. And when I did my research, it was sound travels through water 5 times faster through water. So if we did, maybe the aquatic med beds might be our next wave of the future, by putting the sound through the aquatic bed, maybe, right?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, sound does travel faster in water, but one of the really interesting aspects to cymatics that I think is again not commonly known is that when sound enters into water, the vibrations are actually compressed by a ratio which relates to the density of air molecules versus the density of water molecules. And this is why when sound, even low frequency sounds, are injected into the Cymascope instrument, we can make them visible. I'm going to give you an example here that the 27.5 hertz frequency, which is obviously a very, very low frequency, it's the lowest note on a piano, right? The very, very lowest note. That note has a wavelength, if I'm remembering this correctly, of 12.37 meters. So about 37 feet, right? That's the length. We're calling it wavelength because that's the scientific jargon we have to use. They're not waves at all, they're bubbles, as we've already talked about. But the length of the vibration, let's say, which is called wavelength, the length is 12, I think it's 12.37 meters. So how is it, for example, that the cochlea in your ears, which is only just over an inch long when it's unwound, it's like a little snail, as you know, in the ear. And if you unwind that, it's about 30 millimeters, which is just over, an inch long. How is it that this little organ in your ear is able to sense this very long, low piano note? And the reason it turns out is because of this differential between the density of air and the density of water. And the figure is actually 820 times to 1. That's the ratio. So these very long piano notes, for example, is how your ears are able to sense them because of that compression ratio that happens when sound enters into water, not just into your cochlea, but obviously into the waters of your body, into any kind of water, basically. So another little tidbit of information that's interesting.
Right? You've given so many good nuggets today. Thank you very much for sharing all this. Are you like really good at mathematics? I can do math in my head, and I have a thing for numbers. Those numbers you've been spewing out today, they're gonna ring in my head. Like I'll remember those in many cases. I can remember a phone number, but I won't remember a name or something, or those license plates. I'll see license plates. So were you really good at mathematics, or is there something there?
I was originally, to be honest, very good at mathematics. I'm going back now a long, long time in my early career. But strangely enough, as my career advanced, I kind of let mathematics go because I was far more interested in the experimental aspects of science than I was in the mathematics. You know, mathematics is important for those people who really enjoy working in the theoretical domain, of course, because it enables the mathematicians to discover relationships between various aspects of the natural world, natural phenomena. So it is extremely important. And of course, you know, so much of the science that we have today in relation to cosmology comes from the work of Albert Einstein, who was, of course, one of the most brilliant mathematicians that ever lived. And actually, in my lab here, I have, on the other side of the lab here, I have a lovely photograph of Albert Einstein. But this guy here that I mentioned earlier, Michael Faraday, he was much more like me in the sense of he really enjoyed experimental science. And so he wasn't a mathematician. However, what happened with Michael Faraday's work, who was showing the relationships between electricity and magnetism primarily, all of the very careful work that Michael Faraday conducted was then given to other scientists to figure out the mathematics, you know, and this is how we've ended up today with electromagnetic theory as a result of, you know, the mathematicians who took Michael Faraday's work. And James Clerk Maxwell is, you know, one of the primary guys that comes to mind. He was a Scottish mathematician, but there were others. But anyway, this is how we have electromagnetic theory as a result of people like Michael Faraday, and then, you know, presenting his work to James Clerk Maxwell and others, who then figured out the mathematics behind, you know, these physical parameters that had been discovered. So mathematics is very important, but for the work that I engage in, not so important. You know, I'm far more interested in the physical, experimental science.
Well, and that's funny you brought up Albert Einstein, because I felt like there was days I was connected to him. My hair's all crazy. And then I go to look up something and he's connected to it as I'm researching it. I'm like, I've become Albert Einstein for the moment, to be, you know, it's like you almost embody that person in a way to bring that information out. So I can understand why you're talking about these people that when you connect with the right, you know, they always say you become who you hang out with. So yeah, I can understand
that. There's a quote actually on this poster that I have of Einstein talking about his challenges with mathematics. You know, if you have challenges with mathematics, you know, just think about my challenge with mathematics. That's not a direct quote, but it's something along those lines. You know, basically, he wasn't the most brilliant mathematician. In fact, he had to actually obtain information from many other mathematicians in order to develop the math needed, you know, for special relativity and general relativity. So he had to, you know, reach out to other mathematicians to develop his own ability in math, which was a little bit limited at the time. But what he was brilliant at, what he was literally a genius at, was his imagination, you know. And he just had a fabulous imagination. And it's certainly one of my strengths as well, my imagination and my, well, just general curiosity, I would say, is, you know, one of my strengths, because I just have a very curious mind.
And that's where we all should be every day, because there's no way we know everything, and there's multiple perspectives for every single situation. Even to a math problem, it can be done more than one way.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. So it's funny, because when my daughter's in school and and I tell her, I go, your math teacher's going to ask you to do it one way, but if you can get the answer on your own, believe yourself, you know, trust yourself, because there's other ways to do this, you know, to find a solution. So John, I have to ask you, what is your superpower?
My superpower, well, probably what I just said, you know, curiosity, I think is a superpower, because without my curiosity, none of the discoveries that I have made would have been made. And so I would put it down to curiosity for sure. Mm-hmm.
I love that. Another invisible, realm that we're tapping into. So, wow, you can't define any superpower until you just put it out there and create it, and I guess define it for yourself. So everybody has their own, and that's his superpower, which I'm excited to hear. So, John, where can you? Thank you so much for hanging out with me today and learning and growing together. So beautifully said. And can you just remind everyone where to find you again? I want to make sure that people, especially the younger generations, he's someone to follow. Those of us who have been doing this work for decades, in his case, he's leading the way. He's the pioneer, and he's here to teach you new methods and systems that can help this planet. And we need people to learn them from him. So please contact John here.
Well, of course, my work is on our own websites, cymascope.com, C-Y-M-A, scope like microscope. So cymascope.com, where you'll find a wealth of information on my general research, certainly not up to date yet because I need a little bit of time to update it. But still, even as it stands, there's a wealth of information that you can tap into there. And then we have a shop which actually supports our ongoing research. So because we are entirely self-funded, so soundmadevisible.com. And one of the products that we really love, and I think, I'm hoping that some of your viewers would enjoy having their DNA voice signature made by us. Doesn't cost a lot of money, but it really does help support our ongoing research. And this is it's great to see your voice made visible, or the voice of a loved one made visible, colorized to your own choice. And it's a really lovely thing to, as a talking point in your home, a great legacy to pass on to future generations. So, please do consider looking at soundmadevisible.com. And then the other site is the Shift Network. I've only been working with the Shift Network for about 2 years now, but they're a wonderful bunch of people. They're really doing a great job in helping to educate the millions of members, and I've been involved in teaching courses with them. So they have some evergreen, as they're called, evergreen courses of mine. If you're interested in learning more about cymatic science and sonic science and sound therapy and music medicine, there are 2 courses that are evergreen. Just go to theshiftnetwork.com and type in the word cymatics in their search bar, and it'll immediately pop up with these 2 courses that I've already taught. But this year I'll be teaching more courses with the Shift Network they'll be obviously live.
Wonderful. Yes, that's great news. So this is our future, everyone. Jump on it, tell your kids, tell your friends, tell your family, because this is where we're going. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll tune in again soon.
Thank you so much, Noelle. It's been really wonderful.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.